Welcome to the missing ledger. Some people vanish without a trace, leaving behind only questions, theories, and families still searching for answers. Every case we cover is based on publicly available information, verified reporting, and known evidence, presented with respect for those affected. Before we begin, subscribe to the Missing Ledger and turn on notifications so you never miss a new investigation. If you support bringing attention to missing person cases and unsolved mysteries, please leave a like. It helps these stories reach more people. And before we open today's case file, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We'd love to know where our viewers are joining us from. Now, let's examine the evidence, retrace the timeline, and uncover another mystery that has yet to be solved. Have you ever wondered what happens to a case when the last person who saw someone alive wears a badge? Not a stranger in the dark, not a rumor from a bar, but a sworn officer of the law, the one person a family should be able to trust completely when their son does not come home. Before we get into tonight's case, tell me where you are watching from, and if a story about power, silence, and two men who vanished within months of each other stays with you, the way it stayed with an entire community in Southwest Florida, hit subscribe, because these are exactly the names that deserve to keep being said out loud. In the span of less than 4 months, between October of 2003 and January of 2004, 2 men vanished from Collier County, Florida, after being taken into a patrol car by the same sheriff's deputy. Neither man was ever seen again. More than 2 decades later, no bodies have been found, no charges have ever been filed, and the deputy at the center of both cases has spent the rest of his life denying any wrongdoing, while investigators, journalists, and 2 grieving families have spent that same span of years trying to understand exactly what happened in the gap between a traffic stop and a convenience store that neither man ever appears to have reached. The first man was Felipe Santos, a 23-year-old originally from Oaxaca, Mexico, who had been living in Immokalee, Florida for 3 years, working steadily and sending money home to support his family. He had a fiancée and a baby daughter only a few months old. On the morning of October 14, 2003, at around 6:30, Santos was driving to work with his 2 brothers when he was involved in a minor traffic accident on Immokalee Road. A Collier County Sheriff's deputy named Stephen Calkins responded to the scene. Because Santos did not have a valid license or insurance, and because he was driving without documentation, Calkins cited him for reckless driving and placed him in the back of his patrol car. According to Calkins, he later changed his mind about taking Santos to jail. He said he decided instead to give him a courtesy ride to a nearby Circle K convenience store, roughly a mile from the accident scene, and that he last saw Santos walking toward the pay phones outside. Santos's boss tried to bail him out of jail later that day, only to discover he had never been booked. He was never heard from again. His brother filed a complaint with the sheriff's office, but an internal investigation cleared Calkins of wrongdoing on December 2, 2003, citing only carelessness in duty performance, a finding that closed the door on any further scrutiny of Santos's disappearance for the time being. Just over a month later, that door reopened, and this time it would not close again. On January 12, 2004, his own 27th birthday, Terrance Williams left his home in Naples driving his white 1991 Cadillac, expecting to start his shift at a local Pizza Hut at 10 that morning. Between 9 and 10 that morning, several witnesses at Naples Memorial Garden Cemetery, including cemetery employees, saw the same deputy, Stephen Calkins, pull Williams over. They watched him ask for identification, which Williams did not have, pat him down, and place him in the back of the patrol car. Before driving away, Calkins asked the cemetery staff if he could leave Williams's Cadillac parked in their lot. Witnesses later reported seeing Calkins return to the cemetery somewhere between 15 minutes and an hour afterward, moving the Cadillac from where it had been parked to the side of the road. The car keys were found on the ground beside it. Williams never showed up for his shift. He never called his mother, Marcia Williams, something family members insisted he simply did not do, especially not on his own birthday. When he did not come home, his family grew worried and eventually located his towed Cadillac at the cemetery, discovering that the tow report bore Deputy Calkins' signature. When the family contacted the sheriff's office directly, they learned that no incident report had been filed and no arrest had been logged. When dispatch first reached Calkins about the missing Cadillac, he claimed to have no memory of arresting anyone or having any vehicle towed that day. Later, when contacted again, his memory reportedly improved. Days after that, his supervisors asked him to file a formal incident report, and the account he gave then contained details that would not hold up under scrutiny. Calkins wrote that he had first encountered Williams at 12:15 that afternoon, after noticing his car appeared to be in mechanical distress, a timeline directly contradicted by the cemetery employees who placed the stop at 9 or 10 in the morning, a time that lined up with Williams's scheduled shift start. Calkins claimed that Williams, worried about being late for work, had asked for a courtesy ride to a nearby Circle K, and that he had agreed. He said that after dropping Williams off, he returned to the Cadillac, discovered the registration paperwork was not where Williams had told him it would be, felt deceived, and called the Circle K from his work phone to ask for Williams directly, only to be told by a clerk that no one by that name worked there. Investigators checked every piece of that account against the records, and none of it held up. There was no surveillance footage from the Circle K showing either Calkins or Williams anywhere near the store. Circle K employees, when interviewed, could not confirm that either man had ever been there. Phone records from Calkins' own department-issued cell phone showed no call ever placed to the Circle K at all. An internal review would eventually catalog nearly 24 untruthful or inconsistent statements Calkins made about the day he encountered Terrance Williams, and Calkins underwent 3 separate polygraph examinations in 2004, specifically about the Williams case, all 3 of which reportedly indicated deception on the central details, including the true nature of the stop, the decision to give Williams a ride at all, and the actual location where he says he dropped him off. It was around this same period that a new and deeply troubling connection surfaced. The Mexican consulate in Miami contacted Marcia Williams to tell her about another young man who had vanished under strikingly similar circumstances only 3 months earlier. That man, of course, was Felipe Santos, and the deputy in both cases was the same person, Stephen Calkins. Because of those parallels, an extensive multi-agency investigation was launched, eventually involving the Collier County Sheriff's Office, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the FBI, and the United States Attorney's Office, which at one point examined the disappearances as potential hate crimes, given that Calkins is white, Santos was a Latino immigrant, and Williams was a black man. Doug Moll, an assistant United States attorney who led a multi-agency task force investigating the cases at the time, has said publicly that his personal belief is that both men were killed because of their race, though it is important to be clear that this reflects his stated opinion rather than a criminal finding, since no charges were ever ultimately filed against Calkins or anyone else in either case. Investigators searched Calkins' patrol vehicle extensively, including luminol testing and forensic residue analysis focused on the trunk area, looking for any biological trace of either missing man. None was found. A GPS tracking device was reportedly placed on Calkins' personal vehicle at one point to monitor his movements, but it did not lead investigators to any location connected to either disappearance. Extensive searches of wooded areas, canals, and remote sites across Collier County turned up nothing. Without a body, a confirmed crime scene, or forensic evidence directly tying Calkins to either man's disappearance, prosecutors concluded repeatedly that they did not have enough to bring criminal charges, despite what internal investigators and federal officials alike have described as a deeply troubling pattern and a story that simply did not add up. Calkins was ultimately fired from the Collier County Sheriff's Office in 2004, not for causing either disappearance, but for providing false and inconsistent information during the internal investigation into the Williams case. He appealed his termination, and it was upheld. He has never been criminally charged in connection with either Felipe Santos or Terrance Williams. Through his attorney, he has consistently declined interview requests from journalists in the years since, and in a deposition connected to a later civil lawsuit, he maintained his original account, insisting he had simply dropped both men off at convenience stores and had no further knowledge of what happened to them after that. For more than 2 decades, both families have refused to let the cases fade into the enormous backlog of unresolved disappearances that most law enforcement agencies quietly stop actively pursuing. Marcia Williams became one of the case's most persistent and visible advocates, speaking to journalists, working with national missing persons organizations, and keeping her son's story in front of investigators and the public alike, year after year, long after the initial wave of attention had passed. She has described keeping a lock of her son's hair and a photograph of him in a navy blue t-shirt, positioned so that when she walks past it, it looks as though Terrance is looking back at her. Across the Gulf of Mexico, in Oaxaca, Felipe Santos's family and friends have carried a different but equally unresolved grief. Friends there have said publicly that he did not deserve to disappear the way he did, and that not being able to recover his remains has meant his parents have nowhere to grieve him properly, no grave to visit, no place to pray, everything left permanently suspended between hope and certainty. In 2018, actor and director Tyler Perry offered a $200,000 reward for information leading to either man's location or to an arrest in either case, a gesture that helped pull the story back into national headlines nearly 15 years after both men vanished. Civil rights figures including Reverend Al Sharpton and NAACP leader Ben Jealous joined Perry in pushing for renewed attention, and the disappearances were later featured on national television programs covering unsolved cases. In more recent years, both CNN and NPR have produced extensive investigative reporting on the case, including an 8-episode podcast series that interviewed dozens of people connected to both men's lives and their final known hours with Calkins, reporting that helped introduce an entirely new generation to a story that Collier County has never fully been able to close. Terrance Williams's family also pursued a wrongful death civil lawsuit against Calkins, which concluded in 2023 without any judgment implicating him directly in either disappearance, following a deposition in which he continued to maintain the same account he had given investigators nearly 20 years earlier. The Collier County Sheriff's Office continues, to this day, to list both Terrance Williams and Felipe Santos as missing and endangered persons, both last confirmed in Deputy Calkins's custody. Both cases technically still open even as active investigative leads have slowed considerably over the decades. In 2025, marking more than 20 years since Williams's disappearance, public media outlets in Southwest Florida revisited the case directly with Marcia Williams, giving her another opportunity to describe, in her own words, what it has meant to spend 2 decades not knowing what happened to her son on his own birthday. That same year, when human remains were discovered elsewhere in Naples, investigators moved quickly to pursue DNA analysis in connection with a number of the county's long unsolved cases, including those of Williams and Santos, though no confirmed match to either man has been publicly reported. Stephen Calkins, now in his late 60s, is reported to be living in Iowa. He has maintained his innocence in both disappearances for more than 2 decades, and in the absence of any physical evidence linking him directly to whatever happened to Felipe Santos or Terrance Williams, The state has never been able to prove otherwise in a courtroom. What remains instead is a documented record filled with inconsistencies, failed polygraphs, a pattern investigators themselves have called troubling, and two families who have spent more than 20 years insisting that a man does not simply vanish from a convenience store parking lot without a single witness, a single frame of surveillance footage, or a single phone call ever confirming he arrived there at all. Both cases remain open. Both men remain missing, and in Naples, Florida, and in Immokalee, and across the Gulf in Oaxaca, two families are still waiting for the day that either the physical evidence or someone's conscience finally closes the gap between a patrol car and the two convenience stores that Felipe Santos and Terrance Williams, according to the only account anyone has ever been given, walked toward and were never seen leaving. It is worth sitting with just how thin the physical record actually is, because that thinness is itself one of the most unusual features of this entire case. In the vast majority of missing persons investigations, even ones that stretch on for decades, something eventually surfaces, a partial confession later recanted, a stray piece of clothing recovered miles from where anyone expected it, a single grainy frame of security footage that reopens an old debate. In the cases of Felipe Santos and Terrance Williams, more than 2 decades of searching, forensic testing, and multi-agency cooperation have produced almost nothing beyond the deputy's own shifting, internally contradictory account of what happened after he took each man into custody. No blood, no fibers, no confirmed sighting at either Circle K, no security footage placing either man anywhere after the moment witnesses last saw them get into that patrol car. That absence has shaped the entire course of both investigations. Prosecutors have said, repeatedly and consistently over the years, that a criminal case requires more than a deeply troubling pattern of behavior and a documented history of dishonesty. It requires physical evidence connecting a specific person to a specific crime, evidence that, in this case, has simply never materialized despite searches of wooded land, canals, retention ponds, and remote parcels across Collier County, despite forensic testing of Calkins' patrol vehicle, and despite the involvement of federal resources rarely devoted to a single county's missing persons cases. Without that evidence, the state has said again and again that it cannot move forward with charges, regardless of how implausible Calkins' own account has come to look under 2 decades of scrutiny. The racial dimension of the case has never fully left the public conversation surrounding it, and for good reason. Felipe Santos was an undocumented immigrant from Oaxaca working in Immokalee's agricultural economy, a community with a long and difficult history navigating its relationship with local law enforcement. Terrance Williams was a black father of 4 with a prior criminal record that his own family has said caused investigators to treat his initial disappearance with less urgency than it deserved. Advocates who have followed the case closely, including federal officials involved in the original task force, have pointed to that pattern directly, arguing that both men may have been targeted in part because Calkins calculated, correctly or not, that their disappearances would draw less scrutiny than the disappearance of a different kind of victim might have. Whether that calculation, if it existed at all, reflects deliberate criminal intent or something else entirely, has never been resolved in any courtroom, and it likely never will be without new physical evidence. What has changed, gradually, over the past several years, is the sheer scale of public attention the case continues to receive. National investigative outlets have returned to it repeatedly, drawn by the same unresolved questions that first pulled federal investigators into Collier County more than 20 years ago. Podcast series have interviewed dozens of witnesses, family members, and former colleagues of Calkins, piecing together a portrait of a 17-year veteran officer who, by several accounts, had grown privately frustrated with a justice system he felt let too many of the people he arrested walk free, before paperwork was even finished. Whether that frustration ever curdled into something far more dangerous is a question that has driven 2 decades of speculation, all of it circling back to the same unbridgeable gap: no body, no crime scene, no proof beyond a documented pattern of lies. For Marcia Williams, the case has never been an abstraction to be debated by strangers online, however much attention it has drawn over the years. It has been the daily, unresolved reality of raising the rest of her family without her son, of marking every one of his birthdays since 2004 as both a celebration of a life and a reminder of the exact date it was interrupted. She has continued to work with national missing persons organizations, has sat for interview after interview with journalists revisiting the case at each new anniversary, and has said clearly and consistently that what she wants most, more than 2 decades later, is not vengeance but simply the truth, an answer to the single question that has defined her life since her son's 27th birthday, which is what actually happened to him after he got into that patrol car. Felipe Santos's family has carried a version of that same unresolved grief across an international border, a distance that has made their search even harder to sustain, and their access to updates on the American investigation even more limited. His fiancée raised their daughter without him. His parents in Oaxaca have spent more than 2 decades without a grave to visit, without the ordinary rituals of mourning that even the worst tragedies usually allow a grieving family, because there has never been a body to bury, and because the last confirmed sighting of Felipe Santos remains, to this day, a Collier County deputy driving him away from the scene of a minor traffic accident on an October morning in 2003. The case has also become, in its own way, a case study in what happens when institutional accountability moves slower than public suspicion. Calkins was fired, but only for lying to internal investigators, a technical distinction that has always felt, to both families and to much of the public following the case, like a strange kind of justice, real enough to end a career, but far short of answering the actual question at the center of everything, which is where Felipe Santos and Terrance Williams actually are. Advocacy organizations focused on missing persons cases have pointed to the disappearances repeatedly over the years as an example of exactly the kind of case that risks falling permanently into the gap between what departments are willing to say publicly and what they are able to prove in court. A gap that can leave a family with a fired officer, a documented pattern of dishonesty, and still, after everything, no actual answer. Every few years, something reopens the case in the public imagination: a new documentary, a new podcast episode, a reward offer from a public figure, a discovery of unidentified remains somewhere in the county that briefly raises and then lowers the hopes of both families all over again. Each time, investigators run the same forensic comparisons, and each time, so far, neither Terrance Williams nor Felipe Santos has been found among them. The pattern itself has become part of the story: 2 families whose grief gets interrupted every few years by a fresh wave of attention that always seems to promise resolution, and has not, as of this telling, ever delivered it. This has been the story of Felipe Santos and Terrance Williams. If their family's decades-long search for answers matters to you tonight, consider sharing this video. And if you know anything at all about what happened to either man after January of 2004 or October of 2003, please contact the Collier County Sheriff's Office directly, because more than 2 decades later, their mothers are still waiting for someone to finally tell them the truth. That brings us to the end of today's investigation. Even after all these years, this case remains unsolved, and many questions are still waiting for answers. Until new evidence emerges, the truth remains unknown. What do you think happened? Share your theory in the comments below. We read your thoughts and appreciate respectful discussions about these cases. If you want to follow more real missing person cases, unsolved mysteries, and cold case investigations, Subscribe to the Missing Ledger and turn on notifications so you never miss a new case. If you found this investigation informative, please leave a like. Your support helps us continue bringing attention to stories that should never be forgotten. Thank you for watching The Missing Ledger. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and never stop searching for the truth.